Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best-fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Right. Well, let's get rolling then. So mapping the cookie crumbs, a hands-on approach to process mapping. Hopefully everybody's in the right webinar and hopefully excited to be here. I am. My name's Gary Harpen. I'm the COO at Innovia Consulting. I've been with Innovia about 5 years now, and I've been the COO for going on 3 years. So I started out in the sales force and worked my way to the COO role over a short period of time. My background prior to coming to Innovia, I spent 29 years in the pharmaceutical industry. My background's engineering, but I did a lot of process management and operations. So my background's manufacturing, and part of that was process improvement, process mapping. So I've done got a lot of experience outside of Innovia with process mapping and how you can use it within your company. So hopefully I will be able to share some of that knowledge today. The agenda is really to talk about who benefits from process mapping, the what is the process mapping, when is process mapping, when it should be used, where, and why, and the how, and then open it up for Q&A. So I'd like us to be interactive. Who benefits from process mapping? You're exactly right. Everyone benefits from process map. Any organization can benefit from process mapping, anywhere from manufacturing industries, health, education, anyone that has a process. So in my 10-year in the pharmaceutical industry, I managed a very large manufacturing site. And one of the things I was challenged with is to go through and create process improvements. So part of that process, we mapped out all of our processes from HR, finance, quality, finance, operations, maintenance. We looked at every process, mapped them out, and looked for opportunity within those. Anyone who wants to visualize their process flow needs to do process mapping. So what is process mapping? How many people have used process mapping out there?
We have one answer so far, and Robin said yes.
So process mapping is a series of tasks or steps that is completed to accomplish one goal. So typically, it depends on your process. So let's just say that we're going to go from sales order to order fulfillment. And so if you mapped out that, you would be looking at all the steps that it takes to get to from one end of the starting point to the finish line of actually fulfilling an order. So how deep you go is really up to you. I encourage people to do process mapping to show the general flow, but don't get too specific because you can get marred down into the weeds. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Can show elements like who is involved. And it can also show kind of the flow and the process model and workflow diagram. So if you have software where you could utilize automation and workflows, it definitely gives you a leg up to identify those steps that you have to build the workflow for. When can process mapping be used?
So Amy says at any point in time. Jordan says we've been using it to develop the steps for mapping out a new AMS. Rachel says anytime or during strategic planning, ?
There you go. All are correct. I mean, so anytime, any place, typically one of the things that we do within our Innovia Consulting is if we go into a client and they're wanting to do an upgrade, we typically ask them if they fully understand how the process works today, how it flows. And if they say, well, we do, but we think we could benefit from redoing it before we do an upgrade or a re-implementation, we will suggest doing process mapping at that point. Creating a standard operating procedure. You can, if you get to the level of detail, you can actually pretty much write it in a outline format and have a standard operating procedure as well. If you're looking to eliminate waste, this is one of the things that I did at that site was that I went through, built the process maps, and then went back and said, okay, where do we see opportunity for improvement? If you want to understand your process or, determine the existing process structure is effective or leverage software, as I just said, tracking the amount of time it takes to complete a process. So if you're looking for eliminating waste, a lot of people will put time on each of those steps and see where the biggest, what I will consider opportunity to eliminate some time and speed up your process. Why use process mapping?
There hasn't been an answer just yet.
Okay, that's okay. We answered some of it just in the past on where you use it. It kind of answers both in terms of why. Improve training. So if you've got new people, I know within Innovia, we built process maps for all of our sales process so that when we brought a new salesperson on and they were going to walk through the sales process for, an ERP system, we have those steps identified just so that we can kind of lay it out in front of a person and they can follow it and use it as their training guide as they work through their first case. Improved tracking and visibility helps to uncover gaps of existing workflows. So, a lot of times when we would go through it, you would start seeing where you had, let's just say 4 levels of approval on a quality issue. And you start seeing that it goes through this approval, and then it goes through that approval, and then it goes through this approval, and it just stands out and says, why do I have 4 approvals for the same thing? If the regulatory government requires it to be at a certain level, you should have 1 before that and that level, not 4. So it's an opportunity to reduce the amount of time it takes people, but it also the overall process can be streamlined. Reduce employee burnout. Clear indications of burnout of a broken process. If people are doing something very repetitive and over, is there a chance to automate that and let them work on the important things, not just the routine. It shows compliance. So a lot of companies, I should say a lot of agencies require you to have procedures on how do you work the process so that they can see that your people are consistently doing it. And it can also enable quicker decisions making. Okay. The where. So, there are ways to do process mapping under digital options. There's a Fig Jam. It's a specified design tool, advanced whiteboarding. You really don't, I've never used it. I do know it's out there and I've heard people use it. Microsoft Whiteboard is another one where you can, it's free. You can do that remotely. My favorite and the one I highly recommend is in person. And why is that? Body language speaks volumes when you're in a room. You see people withdrawing, you see people squirming in their seat when someone else is talking about something. If you do it remotely, it is hard to see that body language. So I always recommend in person unless it's absolutely not possible. I've done them both ways, especially during COVID. I did everything remotely. I used cameras as best I could, but it was still not as effective as being in a room and seeing people faces and people looking at each other and generating ideas from each other. So, my favorite is the post-it notes on a whiteboard, on a wall. I typically will do the brown paper, put it up on the wall and use post-it notes. That way, at the end of the meeting, I can take a picture of it, I can roll it up, and I can take it back and document it in electronic format. I always encourage you to keep it in electronic format because, it's obviously post-it notes aren't going to last forever. And if you can live with the picture, that's fine. I usually go into Visio and I put it into a workflow software package like Visio. But pretty inexpensive process to do. The how. Who should be invited?
Jordan says all decision makers. Amy says all necessary parties that are involved such affected, and Beth said all stakeholders.
Okay. I think that, so depending on what process you're talking about, my experience has been, I want one sponsor that owns the process that I'm outlining. And then I want the people that actually do the process. Once you get the process built, then you go back and you bring in people that are the decision makers. If you want to make change, pull them in at that point. But the key to any good process map is having people that know and have done it before. So you always start out with current state and you outline the current state of your process and how it flows. Then if you want to move into future state where you're driving improvement, that's where you probably need to bring in more of the stakeholders and more decision makers to help you decide, what can we and what we cannot do to modify the process. Again, supplies needed is post-it notes, different colors, Sharpie markers, one person who's facilitating it. A large whiteboard or a sheet of paper will work. Don't forget the snacks. The key with snacks is you keep people energized, you keep people, so drinks and snacks are always good for any kind of working session to keep people motivated and engaged. So one of the things that we did, we gave this at the customer conference, and during that customer conference, we asked for 3 volunteers to come up, and it was really around, how to basically do this in a very simplistic process. So we had them write down the process start to finish on how to bake cookies. We documented each step on a post-it note. We balanced the details, not too high or too low. 80-20 rule, focus on the norm, not the exceptions. That is a key point for any process map. You want to focus on the norm because anytime you start going down the path of exceptions, you're going to find yourself that your process map will have several legs, and it's almost infinite depending on who you talk to. There's always exceptions to every rule. What you want to do is focus on the rule. The 80% of the time it's going to be this way. Those one-offs do not belong on a process map. They belong in a procedure. They belong in some other level of detail besides a process map. Questions on that? Okay, so in our presentation at the customer conference, I was presenting with one of our customers, Jordan, And he and his family actually walked through kind of a mock run. And so this is a very short, it's sped up on purpose because I don't want to eat up a lot of your time watching it. But you can see here what happens when you do a process map with 3 different people, 3 different backgrounds, 3 different skill sets. They land on one process and then they execute. I assume those boys were the quality control unit. Okay. So yeah, it just keeps repeating itself. So, some of the things that we learned, you know, you have to agree on a process, but what's important is the people that you bring into the room must have different perspectives. You need to have a representative from each of those areas that touch the process and make sure that you're getting a full representation of the process when you're building it.
There
You
was
know,
a question.
sure.
Jordan said, what is the most effective way to get all those involved in the process making on the same page? With us building our AMS, there has been a challenge trying to communicate in the right language with the IT people.
Yeah, so the key is the facilitator. I found the best facilitator is somebody that does not know the process. So that way they're not biased one way or the other. And they have to be able to take everybody's input and try to come up with a resolution. Um, the thing you guard against as a facilitator like myself is you guard against getting too much detail and going down the path of exceptions. That tends to derail a process flow, process mapping process. I mean, you have to be knowledgeable enough about the process without knowing the details, but getting those people to voice their opinions and get them to agree upon that is a key function of that facilitator. But as we look at that demo, you'll notice that each of the 3 people had different sticky notes. And the number of sticky notes that they had laying on the counter varied because of their background, their knowledge about how to make cookies, and their experience. So one of the things you're going to find in a process. So in our live demo at the conference, I asked 3 people to come up. One was from sales, I think one was from finance, and then there was one from manufacturing. The amount of sticky notes varied based upon those 3 backgrounds. Manufacturing not only exceeded my 6-foot paper, but wrapped around another 3 foot with the level of detail that they got to. So they were talking about measuring ingredients and combining like 3 ingredients, and then measuring another ingredient and combining that ingredient. And so they were talking about a very detailed process that they felt was important to document and get the right results at the end of the day. the finance person was like, look, we purchase raw ingredients, we mix them together, we cut, we basically blend them, we preheat the oven, we put them on a cookie sheet. I mean, so you can imagine it's much shorter. No one is right and no one is wrong. I think what you do is you take those three perspectives and you meld them into something that looks like you can guarantee that the end product is going to be a quality product, regardless of whether it's information or it's an actual physical product, or it's approval process where you're guaranteed to have the right approval at the end of the day. The key is, how do you blend all that? And it goes back to Jordan's question, how? Well, it's experience in getting someone to help facilitate and show you how to do that is the best way. It's about the only answer I could give at this point. Process improvement, eliminating waste. Every time you go through a process map, you ought to step back away from it and say, wow, is there any way we could shorten this with either automation, with either elimination of a step? So, if you've got people weighing something, one of the things in the pharmaceutical world is we had to test all incoming raw materials and all finished goods. The problem is you can use statistics to guarantee that your quality is good by testing even fewer than what you have been. So you have to collect that data, you have to run it through the analysis, but that whole process is a way to eliminate how many times you're testing your product. And by doing that, you can eliminate a lot of work and a lot of time. But that's just one example of how you can sit there and look at all the steps that you've got and what's included in those steps and try to improve it. What questions do you have?
There doesn't seem to be any questions at the moment.
So I know at the customer conference, people ask me, so how do we know we're doing them right? I had an individual shoot me a bunch of the process maps and I've taken a look at them. I've given them some feedback and some hints. I mean, the best way to do it, if you've never done it before, is to probably get somebody in there that has done it, show you one time. I think, most of the time when I go on site to a client and I show them one process map, they're like, oh, this isn't hard. It isn't rocket science, guys. It's very easy to do. It's a matter of getting those sticky notes and starting the process. The key is always having the goalposts set, right? You got to have the boundaries set. So know where you're going to start and where you're going to finish, and do not let it go outside of those boundaries, because it's important to define that scope so that you just don't keep creeping on and your page gets about 100 foot long. Okay, because at some point you need to divide those processes into smaller bites so that people can comprehend them and evaluate them. So number one, make sure that you've got those boundaries set. And if you're wondering, what do you mean by boundaries? You look at your overall process and you say, okay, I'm going to go from procurement of raws to the finished good. That's a big process. So why don't we chop it into, okay, let's tackle the incoming raws and what we do there, to we then go into manufacturing and what do we do there from a process. Or if you're looking at a quality system and you've got a deviation, focus on deviation process, not the overall quality process. Break that quality process into multiple. If you're looking at financials, your goalpost might be, accounts receivable in that process, accounts payable in that process, procurement of raw materials, that process. Keep it somewhat definitely defined, but keep it small enough that you can focus in and get it done. And then the way this company did that sent me their copies of their process maps, they kept them on attached sheets so that when you looked at them, the process kind of flowed down from start to finish, but each map was built into one page. So very well done.
You did have a question of, are we going to do an example process map today?
It is too difficult to do on a webinar like this. I really would have loved to, but I could not find a way with this kind of interaction to really do a process map. I kind of showed you in the video how people, what that process mapping looked like, and it was very simple on a counter and making cookies, but to visualize putting that up on the wall and starting, the process map from start to finish.
You also had somebody ask, or perhaps see some examples. I've made plenty, but I've done them in a vacuum.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Eric, he said, or perhaps see some examples. I've made plenty, but I've done them in a vacuum.
Yeah, I would say, Eric, if you would like me to, I can send you some examples, but I'm not prepared to share an example today. Or if you've got an example, you could send it over to me, and I'd be happy to look at it and give you feedback. No charge. I mean, I don't charge. So I'm here to help people. I'm not trying to drum up business here for Novia. It's more of process mapping. I mean, we do it for clients, but I mean, if you guys need a hand getting started, you need help reviewing one or giving you an example, I'd be happy to help you.
And you had another person ask for examples, if you could send those out to everybody afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just send them out to the whole group. How about that?
All right, and everybody's saying thank you for that.
Yeah, don't hesitate to start to try. Like I said, it's not rocket science. It's a matter of having a good facilitator that keeps you thinking. And especially if you get into driving improvements, you got to have somebody that asks a lot of questions. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Why do you do it? You get tired of asking the question why, but that's the way you drive improvement. Is you know, I'll give you an example of one of the improvements, and this is kind of, we were doing it for a client. I mapped the whole process, but I'm getting into approval of the purchase. And so they had a stack of documents that went with the approval process. And that document went from one site to the next. It was about, I'm going to say, 10 plus pages stapled together. When it got to the other site, they unstapled it, they reviewed it, they approved it, they restapled it, sent it on to the next site. It went through 4 versions of unstapling, approval, restapling, and sending. And I was sitting there, it blew my mind. And they were like, we really do this? They hadn't even put the whole process together. They did not realize that 4 people were doing the exact same things. And if we'd made these electronically, how easy it would have been to basically do an e-signature, review the documents online, and not have to mail it, wait on the mailing, unstaple it, restaple it, risk losing some of those documents. I mean, it had a lot of opportunity, and you're sitting there going, they didn't see it until we put the process in front of them on paper, which might blow your mind, but it blew mine. But they were like, wow, that's very enlightening. And I see that all the time where people, you just don't realize how much redundancy you've got in your system until you actually put it out on paper. Any other questions, Brian?
I'm waiting to see if any more questions do come in. We are welcoming all questions, just so we do have some time to answer those for y'all. I'm not currently seeing any more questions.
Okay. Well, I won't take any more of their time. I appreciate you all being here today. It's
There's
a
one
little
more.
different. Whoop.
There was one more. So Jordan asked, what are your thoughts on utilizing AI for process mapping?
That's a very good question. I am learning about AI and all of the capabilities of AI. I have not thought about how it's going to impact. But I do not see it. I guess if you've got documents that describe a process, maybe you could use AI to go in and potentially give you a process flow document. I have not tried that yet, but it's possible if you've got the right information targeted where you want it to go to. I caution you to do that in too broad of a space because it's going to be pulling a lot of, I'll call it variations of data. It may not give you any good results. The other area I think it will help, not exactly sure how I will go about this, but I think in driving improvement, you could always pose the questions, is there a better way to do X, Y, and Z, and have that come back with possible improvement ideas. But yeah, I'm on the very front end of AI. We've got several people in our company using it and figuring out where we could benefit the most from it. And we're all just kind of scratching the surface at this point. But great idea. Again, play with it and figure, see how it can help you. It really depends on what your data set looks like inside your company. And because it needs to use your historical data to really map out your process and then drive improvement as well.
All right, so we are looking for a couple more questions if anybody has any, because we do have a good 10-15 minutes left in the webinar. So if anybody had any pressing questions for Gary, please definitely put those in the chat for us. Right. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to add on to any of your slides today or any information?
Yeah, I would say don't, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time around. If you're wondering how to do it, I would pick a simple process like cookies, map it out. Everybody knows it, pull in a few people, look at how you work that process, and then translate that to your business processes and say, okay, who do I invite to this meeting? How do we set it up on the boundaries? So never forget your boundaries. Where are we going to start? Where are we going to stop? And then start working through that process. And it can be as simple as giving everybody a different color. You could just have one color and have everybody's input as you move through. I've done it both ways. I've used swim lanes in the past, and swim lanes are where you have the functions underneath running in horizontal paths like a swimming pool lane, and each function in there, so the task or the step is put in the swim lane of who's doing it. So you can kind of see how it moves through your organization. It makes it a lot more complex when you do that because it stretches it out, makes it much bigger, and sometimes harder to follow, but it does give you the visual of how it moves through your business and the different functions. So you can try that out. I will send you an example of that as well. Again, it's all about how can it help you, and get the base down and then work on improvement. Don't try to improve along the way. Get your base, what is today, and then work on the future later. Okay, with that said, I hope you all have a great afternoon.